Kvílir her ses herine olfirkir fölka karkaren höriden formanares et söli kjálkir kjölnjes lunens. En fusit sires as kjálkiras kortse. Huisar kan nusetsur verheer op filam fuli, kvinse fein raadstrin zur kjenstri op fatsui, rutsinir takens eile inieling heres naseri. Nifinging muis a takens eile fulafer kjálkiras, dan kjatser efamit zerlime. Haures vanahulung herinoi, ha kamam pirasil fin lirinsiris, hipufar her seim sakjem, a kjesir kjatsami at sveiner ham firasilsiran maliniana, nar heo feistjena. Or at least, that's what Phaedrus Kinias, a famed Kállian historian and professor at the University of Kállis, wrote in The Emerging Celestial Identity, first published 2 centuries ago, in the year of the Sun's 4339, almost 3 decades after the end of the Celestial War. In his work, Kinias attempts to describe the historical processes that led to the development of the celestial identity and its opposition to the Kállian identity that had been imposed on the peoples of the East, Tol or otherwise, for more than 3 millennia. But who are the Kállians, the Celestials, the Tol, and what languages do they speak? To the extent that contemporary scholars understand, Kállians, or Kjáloi in Kállian, are a people of Kantric origin. That is to say, they hail from the Kantrian archipelago. It is postulated in the 11th century, a group of Kantrians began a settlement of the Kállian plains, from which the descendants of these settlers got their name. The first polity that is historically linked to what later became known as the Kállian kingdom is thought to have been founded in the year 1100, though at the time it spanned only a tiny portion of the land it did during its golden age in the mid-4th millennium. Early on, these Proto-Kállians spoke an innovative dialect of classical Kantrian that we refer to as Old Kállian, and that later evolved into the modern Kállian tongue. Now, at the same time as the Kantrian settlers established their control of the Kállian plains, a native people controlled the lands to the east, who called themselves Tol, or Tsoloi in Kállian. As far as we know, the Tol consisted of nomadic tribes that traveled between the Hjatsara forests and the southern, or Tol, desert. As these tribes gradually unified and settled down, they eventually came in contact with the Kantrian settlers to their west, and this began a cultural exchange that has been going on for more than 3 millennia. While Proto-Kállians were prolific writers, their contemporary Tol were not, so what language these people spoke is uncertain. Now, fast-forwarding many centuries into the future, the Tol language unfortunately went extinct as a result of Kállian cultural domination over the Tol, but it formed a significant substrate in Kállian. It is this exact Tol influence that has made the Kállian language so unique compared to its Kantric cousins, and such a challenge for Kantrian speakers to master. In modern times, Kállian, or Kállis natively, is spoken by mainly 2 groups: Káloi, that is the citizens of the Kállian sovereignty, and Harinui, that is citizens of the many ex-Kállian post-war states of the Hjatsara forests, the Tol desert, and further east, dubbed the states of suns and moon, or simply the celestial states. It is estimated that close to 30 million people across both groups speak Kállian as their native language, making it the second most spoken Kantric language in the world. While it is a language rich in writing, be it literature, science, or religion, its influence outside of the areas where it is spoken natively is limited, as the former Kállian kingdom fractured and its lands have been unstable for 2.5 centuries. Kállis has 12 consonant phonemes plus 7 geminates, and 7 vowel phonemes plus 8 diphthongs. Its consonants are ma, na, nga, fa, sa, cha, pa, ta, ka, ha, la, ra, along with geminate nasals, affricates, and la. The affricates are historically stops that aspirated and then affricated, but since this affricate realization is the only standard one, I've decided to choose that as my convention over the equivalent stops. Kállian vowels come in 4 fortis lenis pairs, namely a, u, and I. And its diphthongs are w, I, u, A, O, A. Diphthongs act as four-test vowels, and their Lennis equivalents are equal to the first component of each diphthong, so that, for instance, both ua and i become u when reduced. Here are Kállian's most important phonotactical rules. 1. The maximum syllable structure CVCC, where the nucleus can be any monophthong or diphthong. 2. Word medial hiatus outside of diphthongs is not allowed, so that, say, molus is allowed, but molus is not. 3. H can be used only a word initially, and it can precede an initial consonant, which results in words such as hkerats or place. 4. Non-geminated alveolars, as well as the clusters ns and nts, are the only allowed word final codas. 5. Nasals always assimilate to the following consonant, so let's say lymphe is allowed, but limpze is not. The Kállian vowel space can be thought of as a box with edges a, o, u, i. With that in mind, Kállis somewhat inconsistently forbids vowel phonemes in consecutive syllables to cross the diagonals of that box, unless those vowels are a part of the diphthong. If in derivation, declension, or conjugation a word is formed that would violate this rule, the issue is usually resolved by assimilation, which in most cases involves moving the violating phoneme one position around the vowel box. As far as diphthongs are concerned, a is realized as o before a diphthong starting with i, and a as e before a diphthong starting with u. As an example, we can take this word, which is in the singular nominative, and we pronounced leukomia, but actually realized leukomia, because a is realized as o before a diphthong starting with e. The genitive leukomu is realized with no allophony, since the diagonal rule is not violated. Now, we would expect the dative to be leukomi, but that would violate the rule. So by phonemic assimilation, we get leukomi. Another phonetic feature of Kállis is the so-called neutral vowel. The neutral vowel is a phonemic epenthetic schwa added exclusively at the last syllable of a word when its subject happens to be exposed in a way that would go against Kállian phonotactics. For instance, Kállian derivation rules would result in the words ilts and folk, but these consonant clusters are not allowed word finally. So the neutral vowel resolves the issue, resulting in ilts and folk. The schwa is inserted before the final consonant if it is alveolar, and thus an acceptable coda, like in ilits, and after the final consonant if it is geminated or not an acceptable coda, like in folk. Kállian's velars consistently palatalize before front vowels, but also before the schwa when it is the Lennis variant of a. The epenthetic schwa is treated as a back vowel here. This has led some Kállian linguists to consider palatals to be phonemic. That position is not popular overall. The only other main allophonic feature of Kállis is the realization of the somewhat rare h-ch sequence as the voiceless uvular trill, ch. Lastly, epenthetic h, and are used to break word marginal but sentence medial hiatus, depending on the speaker. Kállis uses a variant of the modern Cantrian alphabet as its writing system. In Kállian, much like in Cantrian, the alphabet is used in a way that makes pronunciation mostly predictable. But Kállian's orthography, unlike that of Cantrian, is not fully predictable from the spoken language, and that's largely due to the fact that the schwa is written in 3 different ways. Since Kállian and Cantrian have wildly different phonologies, a lot of the graphemes end up corresponding to different phonemes, but this can happen even in cases where the same phoneme exists in both languages. For instance, this letter represents th in Cantrian, but s in Kállian, even though Cantrian already has this letter for s, which is not used at all in the Kállian alphabet. The Kállian writing system is unique among Cantric writing systems in that it represents diphthongs with standardized ligatures, which are sometimes considered to be part of the alphabet. These ligatures feature letters of the Cantrian alphabet that are not used standalone in Kállian, and this inconsistency is a result of a utilitarian purpose, i.e. ease of writing, but also of historical orthography. As an example, this Kállian letter, which corresponds to the reduced variant of A, appears in the diphthong el, but A is written with this letter, which corresponds to E in Cantrian, but doesn't appear in Kállian at all. Geminated consonants in the Kállian alphabet are marked with a dot above the letter, exactly as they're in the Cantrian one. The latter also marks vowels for length, in a somewhat inconsistent way, depending on the letter, but Kállian does not have phonemic vowel length. However, Kállian does have the aforementioned fortis lenis scheme, so fortis vowels are marked as if they were long, to distinguish them from their lenis equivalents. Furthermore, diphthong ligatures always have one of the two vowel components marked as long, with the choice of which being based on both utility and aesthetics. The Kállian writing system also has symbols equivalent to the full stop, a comma, and a question mark, like in Cantrian, but it also has a symbol equivalent to the apostrophe, which is unique to Kállian. That's because some Kállian words, typically particles, can lose their final vowel in both writing and speech when the following word also starts with a vowel, and that lost vowel is denoted without apostrophe, like in the phrase hipfufer, meaning to adopt, which would be ha hipfufer without this vowel loss. Lastly, as far as numerals are concerned, Kállian has adopted the Cantrian decimal system, which uses Cantrian's 10 vowel phonemes as digits, and which was invented more than a millennium ago. Here we yet again see a use of Cantrian vowel graphemes that are otherwise missing from the standard writing system of Kállian. Kállis has fusional morphology, nominative-accusative alignment, and fairly strict VSO syntax. Kállian nominals and participles are declined for number, singular and plural, and case. Nominative, accusative, dative, genitive, and prepositional. The latter case, which descends from a defunct locative, is used exclusively with prepositions, and is the only one that can take prepositions. Nominals fall under one of 10 noun declensions, which form 3 layers of animacy. Animate physical, which has 2 masculine and 2 feminine declensions. Inanimate physical, which has 3 declensions. And abstract, which also has 3 declensions. Nominals agree with each other by case and number, but not by declension, gender, or animacy. Most pronouns, however, are flexible and typically agree with the implied nominal by declension as well. Let us take a look at an example. Áhuiniré kétszer alpfia charidas. Which means, I gave Kállis an old book, he read it. Now let's take a look at a gloss. Note that Kállis does not have third-person pronouns, which is why the demonstrative pronoun kátses is used instead. This pronoun, much like most, is taken by default to be in the third abstract declension. But in our example, we see that it is in the second masculine declension, matching Kállis, the man who read the old book, and in the second inanimate physical declension, matching Alpfia, the book. At the same time, the adjective charidas, meaning old, agrees with the noun Alpfia by case and number, dative singular, but not by animacy, as the adjective is abstract but the noun is inanimate physical. While adjectives don't agree with nouns by animacy, articles do. Well, Kállis has only one article, which is definite. Its use is not mandatory, but it's rather considered to reinforce definitiveness. So this article comes in 3 forms: I with animate physical nouns, H with inanimate physical nouns, and absent with abstract nouns. Moving on to verbs, they are split into 2 classes. Class A verbs are derived from nominals with the suffixes inir or ungar, and Class B verbs are root words themselves and take on the suffixes ir or As is evident, within these 2 classes there also exists a distinction between E-type and O-type verbs, and that type is restricted by the vowel phoneme in the preceding syllable. Verbs are inflected by voice, tense, aspect, and mood, but not person. This means that personal pronouns are generally required, but they can be dropped when it is clear what the subject is. Kállis has only two morphological moods, indicative and imperative, but it also forms periphrastic, subjunctive, and conditional moods. The indicative has three tenses: present, past, and future, with the past and future distinguishing perfective and imperfective aspects, and the present taken to be generally imperfective. The imperative mood distinguishes only aspect, perfective, and imperfective. So too does the subjunctive, which is formed with the particle ha plus the present indicative, including the otherwise non-functional perfective form. The conditional also distinguishes aspect only, but it is formed with the future particle fa plus past tense forms. Kállis has three voices: active, middle, and passive, with the middle voice typically used for intransitive verbs. As an example, let's consider these three sentences. Kjarar ei falpje. Kjarsarei. Kjarsarfalpje. The first sentence means I'm reading the book. The second, I'm reading. And the third, the book is being read. This use of the middle voice is not mandatory, and Italian speakers often prefer the active voice for both transitive and intransitive verbs. However, another use of the middle voice is reflexive. Take these two sentences, for example. Ofenirei falpje. Ofensirei falpje. The first sentence here means I gave the book, but the second sentence means I gave myself the book. In this case, then, the middle voice is used on a transitive verb, but whose function is reflexive. Fundamental Kállian vocabulary is of Kentric origin, including function words, numerals, basic verbs, and so on. However, Kállis has borrowed a lot of words from the extinct Tol language, though the exact percentage is not known, as Tol origin is assumed merely if a given word does not match a known Kentric root. It is entirely possible that words with no living cognates in other Kentric languages have been misidentified as being of Tol origin, and it is also possible that other, now extinct, substrate languages influenced Kállian. After all, it really is not known what language the Tol spoke. For instance, it is possible that there existed distinct ethnic groups that spoke different languages. Now, regardless of etymology, Kállian words are part of the same Kentric-based derivational framework, which matches quite closely with the derivational system of Kantrian. Generally speaking, there are two ways in which a new word can be derived from an original one: with suffix or with a change of animacy, in the case of nominals. Let's see how this is realized in Kállian with a couple of examples. We'll start with the word alir, meaning end, which is cognate to the Kantrian word ele, with a similar meaning. Here are a few derivatives we can get from this word. By suffixing the noun with eist, we get aleister, meaning last. By stripping the adjective of its declension suffix id, we get aleisets, meaning lastly. Here we can also see the neutral vowel inserted to break a consonant cluster that's incompatible with standard Kállian phonotactics word finally, as is common with adverbs. By augmenting the a from the original root to a, we get eilir, meaning to end or to cease. Here a acts as the reduced form of a and not the fortis of a. Here's another example. We'll start with the word njølir, which means idea and is a cognate of the Kantrian word ange, with a similar meaning. By suffixing the noun with in, we get njølinir, meaning ideal. By suffixing the adjective with yl and removing the declension suffix, we get njølinul, meaning most ideally. By prefixing the noun with im, meaning in or inside, and adding the verbal suffix ing, we get ingjølinir, which means to inspire. As we can see here, the nasal of the prefix assimilates to the place of articulation of the word initial consonant, so becomes ng, but palatalized to ny. By replacing the verbal suffix with ölt, we get ingjøliltir, meaning inspiration. Following the process from earlier, we can also arrive at ingjøliltinulir, meaning most inspirational. For one last example, let's take a look at derivatives from the word kypie, meaning garden, and which is likely of Toll origin. By adding the occupational suffix ulm and changing the animacy to animate physical, we get the first declension masculine and feminine nouns kypfilmus and kypfilmis, respectively, meaning gardener. Here the root vowel ue has caused the derivational suffix vowel to raise to e, so then by assimilation the first declension with high vowel suffixes is more suitable. That being said, this assimilation is not mandated by Conlang phonetics, but it is observed inconsistently even in such cases. Now, by adding the suffix ult to the original and changing the animacy to abstract, we get the first declension noun kypfiltir, which means gardening. Lastly, by keeping animacy the same, but suffixing with aists, as before, we get the adjective kypfeistir, which means relating to the garden. These have been a few things that I find interesting about Kállis, the native language of Kállis and Harinui. I will leave you with a reading of the most famous poetic rendition of the legend of the City of Gold. Who knows, perhaps it does exist after all. Hi kröneins huisar ham feile kjölmeri, med sifischer hefiet som sungar kjemeri. Aanneming hala kjölnjes karkar me hurjes, niet zeker tsaloi lo kjatsa no kjalkiras. Huisar le fastefir nulfir herun hansankar, nufanrins for korput som aspa nurotser. Afening kjatser kipi tvile tikertina, na faharis hara for kolor men ninela. Hususing aster in inieling here heitsima, Conlang pantiel mein communiolinema. Huisar ham fa asairu, orkjouts von linuilir, hasinilli sui kjatser foli fansiki kvilir. Alana Conlang hefer i ifinging lo kjase, men misa hunnuili for a kjøyre med huisar hing i nase. Ankom in i roll horang fansiel me hoch kammer, ana horang kjatsa chochungen ur nup forlafer. Ingolis misa holler non kommira, im fakkar nangiman hilsander tsangira. Ha huisar heo lupi lo kjatsi farnie, lupi heo farnie lo kjatsi lo komie. Le sulseif afernins emmiene, formesing for totsa, usvartsing for tsilime, in lufeeling for halama, ne hris for kjømfa. Nasulsirtsa leip for fussein kielnjen, konnalsir kjatsi nirakirtsing for lukjem, illaskenger nunka falirach pillei. Lafastir isus allister hacher, aliras hlotsurkatsu nemisama ungunner, nu folkutsire kotsu fonriets hulinir, immer pölke folkutsin verkletoran kalkir. Formaner leukets östi foliema, ele hallinanger hacherme tsuli hamfama. Nu kotsu atanyetiras le pönkitsir musu, pasatetiras for orkias kalkiras kortsu.